Again, my name is Jeff Thies. I'm clinical faculty at the College of Business Administration and the director for the Institute for Business Ethics and Sustainability. And we're really honored this afternoon to have wonderful guests and experts in the field of sustainability and entertainment sharing both their passion for this work, its importance, and their professional experiences of applying sustainable practices in the entertainment industry. Our format, I'm going to do a couple of introductions, but after that, I'm going to ask our presenters to share with us, and then we'll have the opportunity for question and answer, which we'll manage through the chat function. A little bit about the Institute for Business Ethics and Sustainability. It is a center of excellence for the College of Business Administration to help students and stakeholders really focus on business practices to advance sustainable development and engage really the imperatives of sustainable development, both moral, environmental, and social imperatives. The College of Business Administration participates in a number of organizations to put education around sustainability and sustainability education at the forefront of how we understand our mission. We are signatories to the Principles for Responsible Management Education, which is a United Nations Global Compact initiative to anchor the Sustainable Development Goals and a commitment to sustainability within our business education and business practices. We also participate in an organization called the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative. And this initiative, GRLI, is a deeply engaged international multi-sector community focused on catalyzing the development of globally responsible leadership in practice. One of the things that has developed out of that collaboration is our launching a course called the Globally Responsible Leadership for Sustainable Transformation course, a gateway initiative of the GRLI. And this is being offered by 7 participating GRLI organizations, one of whom is Loyola Marymount. And there are those in our session this afternoon who are part of this course from our global partners, either in Europe or in Asia. We are really deeply honored to offer this session this afternoon on sustainability in the entertainment industry. As Dr. Kalbers had mentioned, the entertainment industry is a vital industry, certainly in Los Angeles, but also obviously nationally and internationally. And so we have been honored to have had the opportunity to invite and to host experts who will help us understand their work and the capacity and the impact of their work as we learn about these important practices. Our first presenters are Zena Harris and Lydia Pilcher. Zena Harris is from the Green Spark Group. And the Green Spark Group is the industry leader in the field of sustainable production by working with creative industry stakeholders around the globe to help shape a greener, more sustainable future for the planet. Their vision is a transformation in culture to change the climate of entertainment. Zena is the bold visionary behind the Green Spark Group. She has worked with studios such as 21st Century Fox, NBC Universal, and Amazon to implement sustainable production practices on film and in television. Most notably, she was the sustainability consultant on the X-Files, Fox, that diverted 81% of waste from the landfill, and Legion, FX Marvel. Zena holds a master's degree from Harvard University in sustainability and environmental management, and has done extensive research on sustainability in the motion picture industry and the cross-linkage between global sustainability frameworks and motion picture industry best practices. Zena has worked in the field of corporate sustainability as a consultant at SustainServe Incorporated and as the executive director of the International Sustainability Campus Network, a global nonprofit. Lydia Dean Pilcher is from the Green Production Guide. This is an online toolkit developed as a joint effort by the Producers Guild of America Foundation and the Sustainable Production Alliance to help reduce the entertainment industry's carbon footprint and environmental impact. Its members include Amazon Studios, Amblin Partners, Disney, Fox Corporation, NBC Universal, Netflix, Participant Media, Sony Pictures Entertainment, Warner Media, and Viacom CBS. Lydia is an American film and television producer and founder of Cine Mosaic, a New York-based production company focused on entertaining stories driven by themes of female empowerment, social conscience, and multicultural perception. Cine Mosaic specializes in international co-productions and movies based on studio and independent models with business partners in the United States, Europe, India, Turkey, Africa, and the Middle East. She has produced over 35 feature films, most recently Disney's Queen of Katwe and The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and the upcoming feature Radium Girls, which she produced and co-directed with Jenny Moeller. She is currently producing Two Brothers with award-winning Iranian director Bahman Gobadi. Lydia is a two-time Emmy Award winner and was nominated for an Academy Award. She holds an MFA from New York University's Graduate Institute for Film and Television. She is Vice President of Motion Pictures, Producers Guild of America, and founder and chair of PGA Women's Impact Network. She co-authored The Ms. Factor, The Power of Female-Driven Content, and is leading a new PGA project, Culture Shift, creating content toward an inclusive world. She is an adjunct professor at New York University, Tisch Graduate Film Institute, and teaches a seminar she created about the shifting landscape of audience and storytelling. It is with our great pleasure and honor to welcome and introduce Zena Harris and Lydia Dean Pilcher.
Hello. Zena and I work together on a number of different initiatives, from the Green Production Guide to the Sustainable Production Alliance to a new UN initiative that's being formed right now, the Entertainment Net Zero Accord. So we decided we wanted to just talk to you together and kind of tag team back and forth and tell you a bit more about what we do. Do you want to start, Zena?
Yeah, sure. So we thought we would divide this up into a couple of different sections just to show you, just to give some life to production, physical production, what that is, what we think about in terms of sustainability, and then kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about sort of the broader industry landscape, who the players are, that sort of thing. And in between, we can, take questions, or if questions come up in the chat, we can certainly do that as well. We want to know what you're interested in. If something sparks your interest, do let us know, and we'll try to dive into that a little bit more with you. So that should be fun. Definitely put your questions in. I guess to start off. It's great that Lydia, that we have Lydia to talk about like the whole production process, but really it is a process. There's a lot that goes on in terms of making what you see on TV. There's development and script writing and a whole pre-production process and physical production process where they're actually shooting and wrap and distribution and all. So there's a lot that goes on. So we kind of wanted to talk through a little bit about that process first to sort of set the stage there. So Lydia, do you want to jump in and share any piece of that?
Okay. Well, I'll just start by saying that I think my route to being here talking to everybody today started, probably 12 or 15 years ago when I realized, I was an environmental activist and I wanted to bring that to my career, my storytelling career. And I started looking at ways on my sets where we could be more sustainable than we were. And I happened to be a vice president of the Producers Guild of America at the time. And I don't know if you're familiar with the unions and guilds in our industry, but the Producers Guild represents about 8,000 members of the producing team nationally in America. So I was invited to an event in New York during Earth Week. Al Gore had convened leading business leaders, and I thought it was an entertainment event, and I was just going as part of the entertainment industry. And it turned out I was the entertainment industry, and he had invited all of these other heads of industry from across the country, and he really, just looked at every single one of us in the eye and said, we need you to look into your industry and see what you can do and what can you do more than what's happening. And a number of my colleagues and I who were like-minded decided we would form a committee called the the PGA Green, Producers Guild of America Green Committee. And at that time, through the Gore group, we were given a grant from the Alliance of Climate Protection to actually look at a film production set and measure the carbon footprint. And so that turned out to be a Focus Features project, which is Focus as part of NBC Universal. And through that project, which was very illustrative to us of how we can measure our carbon emissions, how we can take steps to reduce it, and then see how we were able to impact our footprint. So from that, we realized that the studios had been having conversations among themselves about carbon calculation. Many of the studios have been calculating their carbon footprint for years. And we teamed up to form the Green Production Guide. That's a tool that we use. It's a free public resource to the entertainment community. And I think Zena and I both have decks. I think at one point we wanted to show you some of the information from the tool. Zena, I don't know if now's the time I should do that, or if you tell me. You've kind of got our roadmap.
Well, let's before we dive into some of maybe the specifics, let's talk about kind of what do we think about when we're talking about sustainable production, and kind of production is like a mini city. There are like 20 departments on a film or TV production. So there are a lot of inputs that come in various ways. And, we've got everything from, accounting, which is the financial system, if you will, or financial industry, or food services, or construction, transportation. We've got lighting, props, set decoration, wardrobe is like the fashion industry, we've got a lot of different inputs coming onto production. And so there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of touch points to think about sustainability across all of those. And how do we get this production, how do we connect everybody up in terms of the goals of sustainability for the production, and how do we get those implemented, practices implemented across all departments on a production, and then how do we track, and measure impacts. And so,
I just want to add one thing, Zena, too, is that we have a very unique industry. And that, sometimes we shoot on stages and we're in studios and we build sets, and that's one kind of production. A lot of times we're out on location, and we may be in the city that we live in, or we may be traveling to other countries and setting up in productions and working. Sometimes they have local infrastructures, sometimes they have no infrastructure. We have a colleague who's about to launch a series in Iceland right now. And even though they make movies in Iceland, there's very little infrastructure. So the challenge is every time we begin a production, we have to look at what the unique requirements of the production we're about to launch are. And that's where we've learned that the best way to take that approach is to do a predictive carbon footprint. and to really sort of like, okay, is this location or is it on stage? And are we traveling or are we at home? And what is all of that combination of things? And where are our heaviest impacts going to be? And how should we prioritize our approach to attacking the carbon emissions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and also this is fun for me because it's fun to talk to a producer about this. But from a producer's perspective, Lydia, I mean, when you're thinking about those, what are you thinking? You know, how are you engaging with your departments when you're thinking about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, we like to start right at the beginning, and in fact, when we know we're going to be hiring a crew and casting the movie, the director and the producers and the studio that we're working with are the first conversation to have. We always have startup production meetings with the companies that we're working with. It's the right time to be talking about these issues. As we're hiring people, you know, we like to let them know that this is a production that the powers that be are very interested in running sustainably. And is that something you're on board with? Do you have questions about it? Even now, as we have created a position in the industry, which is frequently referred to as an environmental steward, it's a position where someone is really in charge of overseeing all of helping make the strategy, implement the strategy, overseeing the reporting of the emissions, working with department heads. A lot of times there's an onboarding process with the cast and crew so that if any sort of awareness, mindfulness, education needs to happen, it can happen right at the beginning.
And that's a lot of times where I come in, and I just so you know to frame what we talk about a lot in terms of sustainable production. For me, the definition of sustainable production is really thinking about the long-term well-being of the crew. You know, are they happy? Are they healthy? You know, what they'll tell you, and includes the environmental and economic aspect as well. So, you know, when we're working, you know, with all departments or with the producers or production managers, these are the kinds of conversations we're having, you know, a lot of times about, how are we going to, you know, train people so that they have a baseline knowledge of what's going on, or what where we should focus, and how they can help, right? What do they see? Where are they going to encounter challenges along the way, given what the nature of production is, and then also, you know, the financial component is very real. Like how, you know, we like to think of sustainability as being integrated in, and not necessarily a bolt-on. So how are we thinking about decisions or asking questions of the producer or the department heads about what you know, the various aspects of production and how they can integrate sustainability in instead of, you know, tacking something on and just calling it good. So we're really trying to think through this big system and big, you know, production, if you will, in a holistic way. I mean, that's the ideal state. Does it always occur that way? Does it always play out that way? No, it doesn't. And I think that's probably part and parcel of, you know, in the industry, is that we go in with these ideal scenarios in mind, and we work as hard as we can to, you know, have conversations with the ideal scenario in mind. And we see how far we can get toward that. And that's what Lydia is talking about with that predictive carbon footprint. Like if we can think through all of the various impacts in the departments, then we can really start to hone in and get as close to ideal state as possible. So that's when we're thinking about, I guess, when we're thinking about starting a production. But Lydia, you go out on scouts and whatnot. What does that look like for you? What are you thinking about then? And what is a scout anyway? Can you tell us what that is?
Well, we schedule our movies and our TV productions, based on moving the scenes around, and those, and we try to put all the locations of all the scenes that are going to be shot in one location together. And we try to make the locations as efficient as possible. And it doesn't always work out that way because creativity and imagination have a strong role to play in how choices get made. What Zena's referring to is there's usually the first person who is hired after the producers and the line producers and the production manager is usually the production designer. And the production designer works with the location manager to pick the locations of the production. And usually, at that point whether your show is going to involve stage work or studio work. So you'll know if that's, you'll have an idea of what city that's going to be in. Sometimes we go into warehouses and sort of make a stage out of these warehouses. So there's all different, as you can imagine, there's all different kinds of infrastructure challenges as you decide where you're going to do that kind of studio work or stage work. We have found, over the years that the stages and the studios haven't updated as rapidly as some of the other infrastructure in buildings. And our Sustainable Production Alliance has been doing research projects with all of the stages and studios around the country. I don't know if you all are familiar, but like in America, the major production cities are, LA, New York, Atlanta, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, even Ohio now has a very aggressive tax credit. So a lot of shows are filming in Cleveland and Cincinnati, New Mexico, wherever the tax credits are, little industries have really developed and grown. And Zena can speak to what's happening in Canada because a lot of amazing sustainability work and, in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver are major production cities. So where these cities are, there's been investment in stages and studios, and how sustainable or how far these facilities need to go is something that's become a big focus for all of us. And we're trying to avoid diesel as much as possible. And it's an issue where I think we're going to talk more about that as we get deeper into this conversation. But as you can imagine, it's an issue in terms of our transportation fleets, because we carry around a lot of people and a lot of equipment everywhere we go. And it's an issue for these studios and stages too. So these are things that we're thinking about and looking about as we go out on these initial surveys to choose our locations.
Yeah, and maybe now, Lydia, it might be a good time to show the Green Production Guide information, because this is where, as filmmakers are thinking about what they, where they're going, what the impacts might be, there's also industry resources available on a website called thegreenproductionguide.com. And it's pretty much where a lot of collaboration has gone into developing resources and putting those resources on the site for free for any filmmaker to utilize. So this is kind of our right now our industry go-to site for tools and resources for sustainable production. So I don't know. I don't know if you want to make. Oh, okay, great.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to run through this quickly. Really, the goal is to kind of show you like a little survey of the tools that we use on a production. And this is the online resource that I mentioned in the beginning that we developed with in the partnership with these Hollywood studios and streamers and production companies that formed the Sustainable Production Alliance. On on this site, which is greenproductionguide.com, we have an international vendor guide so that wherever you are in the world, you can look for sustainable vendors who provide services. And we also encourage people as they work in different places to send us vendors that they discover so we can all sort of share information and update each other. So there's a best practices checklist. I'm going to show you a little bit more about these as we go into it. The carbon calculator, we have case studies, and we have research and reports. This is a picture of our vendor guide. So you can see when you go onto that page, there's a services drop-down menu, and you can literally just choose the category. You know, your wardrobe department can search for sustainable dry cleaners. Your electric department can look for different kinds of LED lighting or electric batteries. You know, there's everything here for everybody that is looking to up their game and sustainability. You can see at the bottom, there's some solar powered trailers. Those trailers are used to do hair and makeup, wardrobes. They can be resting stations for cast. And then there's a shot of some of the movie studios there that have solar. Let's see, so that's our vendor guide that helps you get started. These are a couple of stills from a movie I did with Disney a few years ago called Queen of Katwe, about a young girl in Uganda who was discovered to be a chess genius. And we ran sustainable sets very successfully. And this is an example of the checklist here. So you can see the best practices by department, and it has all of the different departments there. There's a checklist on our website. You can kind of fill out your checklist and populate it, and it helps to track how you're doing as you go. I just thought it was worth mentioning, you know, we all had a tough time during COVID because COVID created a lot more waste than we had before the pandemic in terms of packaging. And we had a lot of PPE requirements for our cast and crew on set. And we were able to find people who recycled the PPE, and we were able to put resources together and distribute it to our teams to try to minimize waste in that respect. This page sort of gives you an idea of the carbon footprint calculator. It is populated by the accounting department, and it's not very difficult. We run our accounting with particular software, and so as receipts come in, there's a tagging process. It goes right into the system, and then at the end of the show, you know, they can sort of pop out these reports that indicate where we were on different items. This is what Zena was talking about in terms of how to get started. So we literally lay out bullet point by bullet point what you can do to get started on a show. It's not that hard, but it's interesting how overwhelming it can seem to people sometimes. And I just want to mention, Zena, will you say something about those volt stacks in the bottom right?
Oh, sure. So I can show you the Sustainable Production Alliance also published a report last year, and we can show you the stats of that in terms of impact of the report. But one of the big, so you see it on the screen here, carbon emissions of film and television production. But the biggest source of emissions is fuel consumption. And fuel consumption can come from, thank you, Lydia. Fuel consumption can come from vehicles. Lydia mentioned trucks and passenger vehicles and whatnot, moving people and equipment, but it can also come from the equipment itself. So we basically show up and we bring our own power to wherever we're filming, And largely we get that power from generators, diesel generators. There are other opportunities though to get power, and that's what we're really focused on now, knowing that, as you can see here, the blue indicates fuel consumption, and it makes up quite a bit of production's carbon footprint. So if we can reduce fuel consumption in our vehicles and in our equipment, we are doing a great job in terms of lowering the production's total carbon footprint. So the Volt stacks are just it's one brand of battery power stations, battery packs. So it's like your cell phone, like accelerated to, it's just batteries in a box essentially, and you charge them up overnight, and you can take them with you in power. We're kind of decentralizing our power now, more and more. There are creative ways that crew members are using these things. But essentially, instead of running off of like one main diesel generator, you can essentially take smaller battery power stations, if you will, and power the catering truck, or catering in something else, or base camp where a lot of vehicles are, or you can take it and you can move them around, and you can even put them right up close to Video Village, where it's right there on set. So there are a lot of opportunities for these kinds of things, and a lot of creative opportunities, and they're scaling like crazy, because this is an opportunity across the board in many industries. So battery power stations are, we're using them a lot in Canada. Actually, we have bigger battery power stations in Canada, so we can power more in different things. So we're taking time off of diesel generators when we're using these pieces of equipment. You're going to see a lot more of them coming online in the States, powering, to charge electric vehicles and all sorts of interesting things very, very soon. And we're really interested in this in the film industry because of this fuel consumption aspect of the carbon footprint. And that's not the only way, though, that we can lower fuel consumption. A lot of times production can plug into the grid. It's been the practice that we show up with our own power, and we want to be self-contained and show up with our own power. However, locations might be able to handle part of the production plugging into the grid, at their facility, or maybe there's opportunity for the entire production to plug in various places as well. Maybe there's a power station or an electric vehicle charger where we're shooting, where there's opportunities for vehicles to plug in, things like that. There are a lot of opportunities for tying into the grid. In Vancouver, there are dedicated power drops for production and events, and any food trucks, whoever's using that space. But production benefits a lot from that, and we're able to take diesel generators off, out of circulation just like that, and save the fuel costs and the carbon footprint or carbon emissions from that generator. So there's a lot of work going on right now to think through these aspects of reducing fuel consumption and the carbon emissions of production. So I think key, in that is infrastructure and electrification, very, very key. And any brains out there, any minds out there, anybody who can help with this and help push the market, and in this way, this is where we as an industry are interested in it. Like Lydia said, we're shooting all over the place. So to the extent we can get that infrastructure, to come online, so that we can, service providers like Portable Electric is one, but there are lots of others that have these battery power stations, can scale up so that we have a place to charge these units, so productions can use them. That is what we're focused on quite a bit these days. So, and I think filmmakers right now are getting creative with the battery power stations that we do have on the market right now. So a lot of opportunity in that space, I would say. And electric vehicles, a lot of opportunity in that space too. So
yeah, it was interesting when the studio report came out that it didn't matter if you were looking at a episode of television or an independent film or a tentpole film, which is the big, action movies. It was like anywhere from 46 to 54% of your carbon footprint was fuel consumption. So it really did redirect our attention to clean energy as a way to make the biggest impact. It's not that we want to, let go of anything else that we were focused on, whether it's banning plastic, whether, all of the recycling that we're involved with, all of the consciousness around the kind of materials that we're using. I mean, all of those things are important. And in many ways, those are things that are important for creating awareness and shifting culture and changing behavior and getting people to think about things. And Zena talks a lot about systems thinking. I mean, we've seen how people can, once they understand the positive impact they can have by making a different choice that's more pro-environment, then they take that thinking home, and then then they come back with stories of things that they've done at home that they hadn't thought about of doing before. And I think that really is the way that we build and change the political will across the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. And another aspect, and this is, we've got this big focus on energy, fuel, clean, clean tech, this sort of thing. We also, everything you see on screen was put there or found in the community. So it was either built or found somewhere in the community, an existing structure, if you will, for location shoot. So all the everything you see on screen is there for a reason, to help tell the story. So there's a lot of materials coming into this system, and a lot of them are big construction materials. They're building sets in the stages. So thinking through that material process, so circularity is absolutely part of the conversation, and an area where there's still a lot of opportunity to test things out, to learn, to improve that system. The ideal state would be, a scenario where a secondhand, a wall coming in would be used again, and then when that structure is finished with, the episode's over or whatever, the structure is then deconstructed, and that material goes to another show and is reused again, dressed in a certain way or painted a certain way and used again in another capacity. I mean, that's an ideal scenario where we would keep these kinds of set materials in circulation. And so there's a lot of work to be done there to keep improving that over time. But a lot of big materials come in and then need to go out in some way. So that's also part of the thinking as to how do we do that? How do we efficiently do that? How do we collaborate across studios or with independent organizations, nonprofits, or whoever's in the community who can help facilitate some of that. That's a big opportunity that is right in front of us, I think, to tackle. So in with that, I mentioned there are like 20 departments on a production, lots of different types of material coming in. We know we travel around a lot, etc. there are vendors and production services that interact with every single department or for that production. So not only do we need to think about our own operations, but there's a lot of engagement or there's an opportunity for engagement with supply chain, with vendors. And Lydia showed you the vendor guide on the Green Production Guide website. But that's, we're looking for companies and service providers who can help enable sustainable production. So a lot of times there's like that go-to vendor that, production likes and they use all the time. And so we're asking questions like, great, okay, you obviously work with production a lot. How about, can you help us in this way? Can you, what do you have, how are you greening your products and services? And so there's an opportunity to engage there because there's such a ripple effect in the community when you start looking at the layers of production and the vendors involved in making this feature film or TV show come to life. And so there's a lot of engagement opportunities. And then Lydia, you had mentioned earlier, I think your work in on Queen of Catway and engaging in the community and that sort of thing. How does that look for you in terms of like community engagement and opportunities there? Because we're going into spaces and there could potentially be a lot of disruption, but there's also a lot of potential for engagement.
Yeah, I'm going to show you one. I put up an India screen, so I'll talk about that first, and then I'll mention Queen of Catway, which was Africa. Can you see it, Zena?
Yep.
This was a mini series that I filmed I produced with the BBC. There's just no food. It gets eaten by some living thing. Yeah, always. In Johannesburg, we found that the restaurants were using this bokashi system of composting with these barrels and using these compounds to break down the material in a more compressed way. And we were able to buy some of those barrels, and then at the end we just gave them to restaurants. But that was, you find that everywhere you go, you kind of have to poke around and innovate to find what solutions are available. I mean, I did a small independent film in New York, and the county was composting, so we just got our caterers to, we just got them a special tub to just take the compost at the end of the day to the county composting place. We just have to figure out what's happening where we are and how the best way to address it. In the countries like these, in these cities where I am talking about in India or in Africa, there's less waste that happens there because there's less there to begin with. But if you work in the U.S. and North America, you're aware of how much bigger everything we do is than it is the way it happens in other countries. But there's solutions, and the thing is, and it's probably this way with a lot of industries, is that time is money, and so when you're in the heat of the action, you just got to get the job done, and you got to get people off the clock, and you got to make the day. And you're talking about days where the filming costs could be anywhere from $125,000 to $250,000 a day. So you can break that down into any time lost on a set. It means that everything has to be thought of ahead of time. And that includes when you get to the wrap of a show, which is when the most of the recycling and the waste issues really come to bear. Because in the old days, it was like, well, order up the dumpsters, and now you really want to think about where everything that is left over is going to go, and to have it recycled or upcycled and reused. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope we addressed your question adequately. If there's more to it, please let us know. And maybe now is a good time to just pause for any other questions that folks might have. Has any of this sparked your interest in any way? Is there a part that you're like, wait a second, that sounds crazy. How do you do that? Because I'm sure that we have a creative answer for you. Let us know if you have any questions, and we can dive in. Do you take the distribution of the film into account when we're doing the carbon footprint? Okay. No, not, I mean, it is accounted for in another aspect of
Studio.
of the data collection, but not when you're looking at the film, the boundaries of a film production itself. Usually that's pre-production to wrap or strike when the production process ends. So that's the boundary right now that we're using when we calculate carbon footprint. But there's a lot more that goes on for sure.
And there are very different departments. And oftentimes the distribution plans aren't fully formed until the film is made. They start to see how the film is shaping up and what it's going to look like and what the plan is going to be to roll it out. And so they're whole other systems and departments than the production side.
Is a portion of the film budget allocated to just set recycling and material allocation? The budgets do include waste management for sure. And that's probably good across every department. What I think really helps is creating a plan for that in pre-production. And a lot of times, I've talked to folks where they're like, why do we need to think about it now? We've got, like 20 weeks before we're going to be getting our, we need to think about this. And my whole thing is like, well, if we can break existing patterns, there's an opportunity for change, right? We know a production process, is what it is. You've got a pre-production and production and strike, and, we've got the whole thing. And sometimes there, at the end, there might be what is called a fold and hold, where, they'll hold the materials, hold everything, in case the show is renewed or there's another season or whatever the reason is. They might need to do reshoots or something like that. So it's not always that you're getting rid of all the materials at the end of production, but we know that's the cycle, that's the cadence. So the planning piece is really, really important, and being able to think through what that budget's going to look like. You plan it out. But yeah, I would say Lydia looks at budgets way more than I do on production, but there are budget line items for things like that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that we may begin to see more, and I think this may be relevant to everybody on this Zoom in some way. I mean, we're kind of in a dire situation. I mean, the Intergovernmental Panel has said we basically have 8 years to reduce our emissions by 50% or irreversible damage to the planet. And we know that 2021 we increased our carbon emissions. So we're in a pretty desperate situation. From working with the studios and the production companies, we see that there are some companies that want more things to happen on the ground. It's a big organism with a lot of moving parts and a lot of people who make decisions. And I think that incentives, for people to be sustainable are going to be necessary. I think that there may be, budget lines that we'll start to see in productions that can only be used if they're used for sustainable measures. And I think that those kind of things are going to be important as we innovate and transition people away from fossil fuels into clean energy and sort of get people to think in ways that they haven't thought before. But we need to accelerate it, and we need to incentivize that acceleration. And so I personally think that we're going to be seeing more of that, and we need to see more of it.
Mm-hmm. And there is a question in the chat about collaboration, legal issues about using set pieces.
Well, there's always, whenever we build something in a location, and we're often, building anything from facades to structures. There's a lot of question. I mean, sometimes we build beautiful things and people want to keep those beautiful things, and there are liability issues around that. On Queen of Katwe, we had to create a flood sequence, and we built a church in this township, and of course the township wanted it, and of course they needed a building like that, and we were not able to legally leave it there. But what we did do was we dismantled it and let the township take all of the materials and pieces away, and they were able to add on and build on their own on their own homes. So the materials weren't wasted. Unfortunately, we had to dismantle something that we were really proud of and everybody loved, but the materials were able to be used nonetheless.
And the reason for that too, that you can't just necessarily give that structure to the community or whatever in a fully formed way, is because these sets aren't built to the same code as like a house or a structure. They're not built to the same standards, right? And so the size of the wood that is used is not what you would necessarily use to build a house, for example. So it's not considered structurally sound for normal living and interacting or up to a city code, for example. So that's why, like in this situation, it would have to be dismantled, but given, in that way. So there are some issues around that to be careful about as well. And then there was a second part to this question about willingness amongst studios to collaborate. And I would say there's absolutely a willingness for studios to collaborate. The Sustainable Production Alliance is a collection of 13 studios right now. And it started, probably around 2010-ish timeframe with 6, and then more and more started coming into the fold. But they collaborate also with the Producers Guild, and all work on providing resources and information on the Green Production Guide. So interestingly, I've worked in other industries too, and I've noticed that in motion picture, there are not only studios collaborating with each other in a sort of pre-competitive space, and trying to find solutions to these how to lower the footprint of production, for example, how to engage with stakeholders and whatnot. But there are industry organizations that have multi-stakeholders at the table, unions and guilds, suppliers, studio facility owners and operators, the Film Commission, all industry stakeholders at the table talking about what they can do, or how are they going in their respective ways to enable sustainable production. So that's, I think, a really interesting aspect of all of this work, is that we, as the consumer of content on TV, we don't get to hear about the all of the collaboration and all of the touch points that it takes to get this content to your screen. So I find that to be really interesting. I find the collaboration piece to be really interesting, and the opportunity for collective action that results from that is quite powerful, I think. Go ahead, Lydia.
Yeah, no, but Zena, I think something you should talk about, because you have done this so successfully, is collaborating with governments. I think you should talk about that a little bit and what you've done in Canada.
Sure. So I guess we're shifting to the players kind of a part of the conversation, just to make sure we cover our topics. But a key stakeholder in film and TV, and I think for a lot of different industries, right, is governmental involvement, governmental intervention in various ways. And so there's been a lot of work. We use Vancouver as a case study. Somehow things just started clicking in Vancouver, BC, and it's like the third largest film hub in North America. So there's a lot of production activity going on there and a lot of opportunity. Production in Vancouver is one of the major economic drivers of the city. So when we talk about production there, people tend to perk up because they want to make sure that they're providing an optimal place for film and TV to come together. So, or to come there and provide economic, opportunities for that city in that area. So, in the city of Vancouver, this is a place where we've got, I would say, in British Columbia. This is a place where we've got multiple stakeholders coming together and sitting at the table and exploring, there's a program there called Real Green. And early on, went through a whole process of creating a strategic plan. Everyone was on the same page about what this program was going to focus on, how they were going to engage the industry, and how we were going to bring these stakeholders to the table. And the city of Vancouver and Metro Vancouver started, realizing this opportunity, and they're at the table with us. So are the electricity providers as well, and talking about this. But what really got going was engaging with city council and a producer there, a local producer there, Clara, worked with a couple of others and put forth a motion to council to explore ways to provide infrastructure, electrical infrastructure in the city, and actually, because filming in the city of Vancouver, the city film office, the number one complaint is about diesel generators. And so that's a way for them to collaborate with the engineering department of the city, etc. These departments didn't talk to each other. They didn't even know, what the other was doing. And so that created the opportunity for collaboration within the local city government. And now we've got industry collaborating with, so we've got folks who handle diesel generators, generator operators, mapping where they are parking their generators in the city. The city knows the area because they have to get a permit to do that. So the city is tracking it. And so we now have heat maps of where generators park, where the opportunities are. The city engineering department is layering on their electrical infrastructure plans onto that so that we can put power drops in popular filming locations. And it's real-time mapping too. So we're getting all of this data from stakeholders, from filmmakers, crew in the city, and the city's using that to inform some of their infrastructure plans. So it's a really interesting way of collaborating with local government to get something done. The city wants it too because they have a climate action plan as well. And so it's been a really interesting and quite productive way of collaborating with government. So I don't know, it's hopefully a model that others can use as well. And I will say that one of the interesting things that the City of Vancouver film office did is create an incentive whereby if the production, when they apply for a permit, if they can demonstrate that they are using a battery power station or even plugging in to remove a diesel generator, they get 50% off of their permit fee. So that's been quite a great incentive. And I learned a couple of weeks ago that I think this was only introduced like a year ago or a year and a half ago. Things kind of run together now, but I think it was 2020, maybe, so later in 2020. 30% of productions right now that shoot in Vancouver are taking advantage of this incentive. So that's a lot of time now that we've just reduced the fuel consumption we've avoided all of this fuel consumption that would have happened. So that was a really interesting statistic that I heard the other day. So these things can work. And then I saw, is there a ruling for production firms to release some sort of carbon report every year? How much emissions? So there's not necessarily a ruling, although they're getting close, or there are regulations, I think, more so in the UK. But the studios do release sustainability reports or CSR reports or ESG reports, however they call them, respectively. They most of them do release that information or have reports related to that. The Sustainable Production Alliance has said that they are going to do a carbon emission report every 2 years. So they're going to aggregate the data that they have between the members of that group to produce a report. So that's of their own doing. So, Lydia, do you do a report for your company? Are you just you're just part of the production? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, my company is a production company, so every production we do is a separate company. But we're working, and we're working with studios and production partners. But I think tracking your carbon footprint is an important thing to do, and I'm noticing that also in the unions and guilds that we're also looking at investments, and where investments are residing in terms of sustainability. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to go through these questions, so bear with me.
Yeah, you're doing great, Zena, and I'm watching them too.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you. Zena, could you speak a little bit about, Lydia had mentioned your focus on systems thinking and how important systems thinking is. Could you describe that a little bit?
Sure. So when I'm thinking about, I think of production as a big system. There are a lot of inputs coming into that production, and things are happening, products, materials are being used, and then we have to figure out what to do with them at the end. So I'm thinking about the system in that way, and how our suppliers and the various vendors and service providers are interacting with that system, and how they enable the sustainability there. So when I'm thinking of when I talk about systems, that is the sort of the context that I'm in, and then when you start to get a little bit further into the nitty-gritty of productions, systems start to look, it's like macro and micro. So then you start looking at the systems within the catering department, for example, and how there's a lot of planning in place, material choices, food choices, etc., that come in. having the conversations with folks, lots of different folks. And then catering's one, construction is another, where there's just a lot more materials coming in. Props and set deck as well. Those are other systems. And then across all of that is the kind of waste management system that we have to figure out, or make sure all departments know how to interact with that system. So it seems like a lot of levels, or a lot of different layers, but that's how I tend to think about production when I'm talking to people, is how is this group interacting with the system, or what systems can we put into place at a more micro level that are going to enable a larger goal. So
thank you. Lydia, you spoke about the urgency of the response to decarbonization and to environmental responsibility, the timeline, the international report, et cetera. And then you also spoke about the need to incentivize behavior change. Where in the industry, and Zena too, but where in the industry do you see either the kind of the draw or the demand, or is this, I'm thinking, are the audiences looking for this? Is this the investors that are looking for this? Are the studios pushing this? Is it, do we have demand that's developing that matches the urgency? How do you see that kind of demand and call for the work side of this?
Yeah. I'll drop something in the chat. The Producers Guild, but around COP, let me see if everybody can see that. Around COP 26, we wanted to focus on the need to really innovate and to really increase the supply chain for options around clean energy. I have, let's see, I'm just gonna share one more slide here that I think, let's see. And there is, I will say that there's more available in Vancouver and Canada than we have in the US, and there's starting to be more things in the UK than we have. But I don't know if you know the Netflix series Bridgerton used hydrogen fuel, generators on that series in London. We don't have that in America. We felt the article that I put in the chat was something that we published in the Hollywood Reporter before COP26, really a call to action, saying that we know that these that energy and fuel consumption is our biggest issue, and we need the infrastructure and we need the resources to be able to implement clean energy on our sets. So again, it's kind of what we opened up with in terms of the studios, but we also we have big fleets that and we're constantly sort of trying to spread the word.
Oh, Lydia, you muted. Lydia, can you unmute? Yeah. Oh, you're still muted. Well, that's okay. I can pick up. So I think it's interesting. This is an industry where the consumers of content, the general public, there's not a they consume the content for entertainment value, not for its organic ingredients or whatever, not for how it's made. And so the public could get more engaged in that activity, and maybe that's where you all come in the sense that now you know a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes, and there's an opportunity to engage and ask for clean content or whatever you want to call it. But so there is that component. But I think maybe Lydia, you were saying, but I think there's a demand by the crew, and producers are certainly one key stakeholder in that, and that's where that call to action comes in as well. There are stories where catering trucks run with a little generator in them, and you take that generator away and plug that truck in, and now all of a sudden the cook doesn't have a headache that day because they haven't been breathing in fumes from the generator all day. Things like that just come into play, and so they start to realize when they interact with some of these technologies that there's actually a healthier aspect to it all too. So folks do notice, and crew do notice, and I think there's demand from them as well. So, and there are government regulations that are coming into play.
Yeah,
and well.
All of the unions and guilds have been coming to this issue in their own way and forming committees. IATSE, which represents a lot of the crew positions and the stagehands, has formed a green committee. The Directors Guild of America has formed a committee. This is called the Sustainable Future Committee. Writers Guild, Screen Actors Guild, everybody is coming to this to see what role they can play in influencing the infrastructure conversation in our industry, and getting the studios to focus more on innovation and and getting the things available to us that we need. Otherwise, we can't impact the numbers. It's not, it's not possible to impact it just by carbon offsets. We really have to cut the emissions.
And could you speak a little bit about the reporting, the kind of the data capture and the auditing and the reporting and kind of approaches taken to that? You also spoke about reporting to the studios, for example, or being part of their reporting. Can you speak a little bit about that reporting dimension of this work?
Well, right now, all of the reporting and the calculating, in terms of until the studios mandate the sustainability, it's voluntary. The show that I put up that was done in India, which was a mini series called A Suitable Boy, based on the Vikram Seth novel. I mean, that was an interesting, and I think all of you are talking with Albert tomorrow. Because BBC mandated sustainability. So we didn't have a choice. It was like, that was, that doing all of the carbon calculation was as important as the call sheet or the production report, which are legal documents that you cannot start or wrap a show without. So all of that was very important. We don't have that in America, although Netflix and Disney have sort of stepped up to in a bigger way with mandating the hiring of environmental stewards. That's something that I think some of the unions and guilds feel very strongly about, because we all have full-time jobs to do on our sets, and it's a full-time job to oversee the sustainability, especially when you're having to look at things in the bigger picture, like infrastructure, because they're big jobs. So I think that in terms of that reporting, we need it. We need it to become mandated. We need that to happen, and we've been asking for it. So hope as things get more and more intense, I'm sure it will come. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are common activities that are that go into the carbon footprint right now, and definitely opportunities to add more in. But for example, fuel consumption, utilities, travel, flights, hotels. There are also consistencies in terms of just waste diversion rates, and water consumption, and and wood. Years ago, studios got together to influence the use of FSC certified plywood in the industry, so that there was a shift. I don't know, 8 years ago or so, a while ago, to using FSC certified wood. So that is being tracked as well. So there are consistencies in data collection, but certainly, an opportunity to improve that and expand, more scope 3 reporting, which is being worked on right now in the industry. So
Thank you. Well, let me first thank you so very much. I just want to, for our the audience, if you will, our students, our participants, any other questions that you would want to post in the chat for Zena and Lydia?
I did see a note on the carbon emission report. Yeah, that one's available on the Green Production Guide, and anybody can read that. So I'm trying to find the link quickly, but but it is available. It's, if you go to the in action part of the guide, you'll see that, plus other reports. I will say that this is where the Sustainable Production Alliance and the Green Production and PGA Green have reached out, have letters to industry for outreach to say, we want, clean infrastructure, and we want to use renewable diesel, and we want, there are several, we want to use electric vehicles on our productions. Like, here's how, you can help support this kind of thing. So, so there's that piece.
And just a quick question about collaboration. You also host an annual Sustainable Production Forum.
Yeah, we've been doing that for, this will be the 7th year. It'll be in October, so we're going to announce those dates pretty soon. But we've been doing, just like, there are conferences in academia and in other industries. I just noticed that there wasn't, 7 years ago, we really didn't have a conference for sustainable production, knowledge sharing, and collaboration. And so we created that. And it's been quite an interesting progression of dialogue over the years. And, you can see where trends are, conversations are going, trends are going, these sorts of things. So it's a great thing. Anybody can attend. Last year we did it virtually, so we had a lot more folks from around the world join in. But yeah, it's definitely a place where you can learn what others are up to, and make connections and kind of elevate your game a bit.
Thank you. And I guess maybe just one final question. So deeply appreciative of your time and everything that you're offering us, and really more importantly, the work that what you're sharing represents. What advice or what would you want to say to our student communities? We have graduate students, people participating as executives through executive education, to undergrads. So there's a spectrum of those who are, involved in this opportunity with you this afternoon. But just advice, guidance, inspiration. What would you share for students?
Engage on the topic. Engage on the topic. In any industry. Certainly. If you haven't engaged on sustainability with the media you're consuming, there's a great opportunity for you there. Be conscious consumers, I would say. One of the key things I always tell people, because everybody can do this, is, if we want to drill down into like what you can do, is eat a more plant-based diet. Everybody can reduce meat consumption in their diet. So that's just got such a huge carbon footprint that that's something that you can do today. And and vote. Get out there and vote for people who are going to make this happen. Policies that are going to enable sustainability. I would say those are just a few pieces of advice.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Lydia?
I would say that, we've been with our guild, and also I also co-chair the DGA committee as well, which is 18,000 members. And we really talk a lot about climate leadership, because it really, modeling climate concern and modeling pro-environmental behavior, and starting conversations about it and talking about choices that we can all make. It's super important. And those of us who are leaders on the set, and that a lot of those leaders are in the Producers Guild or the Directors Guild, we have a responsibility to take that leadership role and help bring other people along. So I think it's something to just kind of think about. I mean, we can do it in so many different ways, but just to sort of think about what those ways, big and small, are that we can do that in our daily lives and our work.
And really what you're highlighting is integrating both the professional practice and the personal commitment and passion, and then really using the positions of both influence and responsibility to call forth the work and then to engage the work. One thing related to that, there was a quick question in chat about what would be the, was it the job, educational background or working background for those who might work as environmental stewards?
Oh, go ahead, Lydia. Sorry.
Well, you should take that one. Yeah.
Well, I would say, right now it's quite varied. So if you're interested, don't let, maybe a lack of experience stand in your way. Ideally, folks who know a little bit about production, and ideally folks who have some idea of sustainability. I mean, that's a wonderful combination for these positions. This is a relatively new position, so it's not like we have a school for this. Although I try to teach people how to think about sustainable production and work in this space. It's varied right now. I wouldn't say there's one ideal background. So
it's a new position. In terms of it is now, being taken on board by, we know it's happening with Disney, and we know it's happening with Netflix. So every production that the formal Disney studio and Netflix is mounting, they're hiring sustainable environmental stewards, and so they're having to train people rapidly. And I think some people are coming out of the environment, some people are coming out of tech, some people know production. They're having to, whatever their skill set is that is a little lacking, they're having to sort of, jump up on that curve really quick. But it's an exciting time. And I think the other thing that Netflix has done is hired regional supervisors that oversee the ones on the sets. So those regionals, and I think they have one in LA and Vancouver and London right now, they're able to look more at infrastructure issues and to really see what the challenges are on the set and kind of help be that third eye as well. So it's a new day, it's great to see people being trained to do this, because we need it.
The building out of the infrastructure to deliver on the work and the integrated work to advance this as you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just say thank you so very much, Lydia and Zena. This has been absolutely wonderful. I really appreciate your dedication to all of us, seeing some of the appreciation being expressed in chat. And thank you really the way in which you both modeled your leadership in the work and helped us understand both the need for the work, but some of the granularity of the work. It's your complex LinkedIn is great. That would be wonderful. The complexity of the industry, the importance of impact, the global footprint that you're talking about, the immediacy of the need, all of the different players. I think at one point, Lydia, you referred to it as kind of a serpentine kind of network of folks. And so the importance of collaboration and all of the shared work related to that, it's so important for us to have an understanding of the scope of that. And then, like you share, the granularity of the work and the management and application of all of those things are so vitally important. So really so deeply appreciate your taking the time to share this with us this afternoon. As you mentioned, there's a couple of other pieces to the symposium that we're having this afternoon. Anna Jane Joyner will be with us in just a moment to share with us a little focus of her work and an emphasis on storytelling. And then tomorrow, we're going to say tomorrow morning, we're in an LA time zone. We're going to be meeting with a representative from the British Academy of Film and Television and their initiative, Albert. And Zena, you had spoken a little bit about some of what their things are as well. So thank you so very much. What I'd say to all of us on our webinar, let's take a 5-minute break. And so by my time, it is 4:35. Let's reconvene at 4:40. And then we will be honored to be joining Anna Jane Joyner and having conversation with her. I'm going to pause the recording here and let's take a 5-minute break. Back after our brief break. And again, thank you so much to Lydia and to Zena for what they shared with us and their important work. And now it is a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker for our symposium this afternoon, and that's Anna Jane Joyner. Anna Jane is from the Good Energy Project, which is a nonprofit creative consultancy that supports screenwriters to weave climate awareness into popular shows and new films. Their climate storytelling playbook will launch in early 2022, empowering writers in Hollywood to write about the climate crisis. Anna Jane Joyner has 15 years of experience in climate communications and is passionate about crafting stories and strategies that inspire new and non-traditional audiences to take action on climate. An enthusiast for audience analysis, compelling creative and storytelling, Anna Jane has inspired evangelicals, Catholics, progressive faith communities, millennial evangelicals, yogis, musicians, rural communities in the Deep South, NASCAR fans, and most recently, Hollywood writers and producers to act on climate. Her work has been featured by Rolling Stone, Grist, Glamour, MTV, the Associated Press, the New York Times, and more. Anna Jane's efforts to engage evangelicals on climate, including her own father, a prominent pastor, was featured in Years of Living Dangerously, an Emmy award-winning Showtime documentary series. She has organized key audiences to take action on everything from moving beyond coal, ending mountaintop removal coal mining in Appalachia, water pollution, federal climate policy, voting rights, GOTV, protecting the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and more. She's the co-host of No Place Like Home, a podcast that gets to the heart of climate change through personal stories. Most recently, NPLH released Bring the Light, a season that explores spirituality and climate crisis. She's also the founder of the Good Energy Project, a budding initiative to support writers and producers in climate storytelling for TV and film. She has a degree in rhetoric and environmental studies from the University of North Carolina. And it's our great pleasure to welcome and to introduce Anna Jane Joyner.
Hi, it's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. Wonderful.
Awesome. Let's see if that. Awesome. Well, I'm just going to jump in, and I look forward to having some questions and conversation later on. but well, a little bit more. You summed it up well in your introduction. But I have been doing this, working on climate communications and campaigning since college. Since at UNC Chapel Hill, it is the only thing I've ever done professionally other than waitress. But yeah, it's kind of been an evolution. I did grow up, my dad is a prominent evangelical megachurch pastor, and a lot of my early career was working with faith communities. But I think that growing up in a pretty intense religious environment, it really taught me about the power of stories, because religion is a set of different stories. And it also taught me a lot about how to use stories to talk to different kinds of audiences in a language and in a way that's very compelling and kind of emotionally moving for different kinds of audiences. So
and Jane, quickly, could we check volume? Some are posting in chat that they're having a difficulty hearing.
Does that sound any better? Or that? Does that sound better?
Much better.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah. So you were sharing that your background and your father's ministry and your experience really focused on the importance of storytelling. And
yeah, I think sometimes people wonder how I went from like growing up in the evangelical environment to focusing on TV and film and climate change. But I think there actually is a through line, and that is that religion is a set of stories, and working with different kinds of communities is very much about how to use the power of storytelling to reach different kinds of audiences. So it's kind of just evolved over the course of my career as I've gotten more and more passionate about TV and film as a medium for storytelling. So I'm excited to share this most recent project, which is called Good Energy. And we're a nonprofit creative consultancy that really was formed with the intention of using TV and film to inspire courage in the face of climate change. And that's kind of taking it from several different approaches, certainly modeling solutions and people taking action, and all of those sorts of things are really important stories that we need to be seeing more on screen. But also even just this, we know we work with quite a few climate psychology experts, and even just the acknowledgement and normalization of talking about climate, even in passing, if it's a character that you care about, is it kind of communicates to audience members to be that it's, it normalizes talking about climate change for audience members. And that is one of the most important things that we can do. Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, who's one of the most prominent climate scientists and a good friend of mine, says that talking about climate change is the #1 thing that you can do. And that's basically the reason for that is we know that according to the most recent Yale data on climate communications, which tracks how perspective on climate changes amongst American audiences every year, the percentage of American adults who are now concerned about climate change, so everything from the scale of like kind of concerned to deeply alarmed, is now at 75% of American adults. And the biggest chunk of that is the deeply alarmed chunk. And that is, I don't even know, at least tripled in the past couple of years. When I first started, the deeply alarmed was like 6%, I think, and now it's 33% of American adults. So, but within that, it's something like only 1 in 4 talk about it regularly in their day-to-day lives. So there's this perception that we've actually worked with USC's Media Impact Project and tracked this in our own research, but other academic institutions have also done research on this, but there's a perception that everyone else doesn't care about climate as much as you do. And that is very much because we're creating this dynamic because we're not talking about it often in our friends and family and different social environments, that, it creates a sense of isolation that can be very dangerous and can keep you debilitated. Whereas if you see other people talking about it, your friends or family or characters that you love on screen, then it kind of makes you feel less alone, which can move you from a place, they call it a psychological safety net, can move you more easily to a place of agency and action and not feeling like you're just stewing with your own emotions. So there's a lot of different benefits to talking about climate more in stories. Everything from, we really encourage a spectrum, everything from it just coming up casually in conversation to, full on projects like Don't Look Up, season 6 of The Affair, a few other examples where climate is a central drive of the characters in the plot. And I'm a huge believer that this is very true, that we do need stories. I think that there's as a strategist, as a communication strategist, I started working on this because I know that we need storytelling to be able to move audiences emotionally so that they are more likely to take action. So that's like the strategist in me, but the human in me, who's been doing this for 15 years and has definitely encountered moments of pretty profound grief and anxiety, because this is, it's a heavy issue to immerse yourself in for 15 years. I've found that it's stories that really pull me out of that emotionally dark place. And so I also did it for a personal reason, is that I love TV and film, and I wasn't seeing climate show up in stories. And it just felt like that was becoming an increasingly egregious gap. And also on the climate side, I've been in the movement so long, I have, it's very clear, and it's been evident for a long time, and what I've really been trying to change, that storytelling is a gap in the climate movement. And that is because the climate movement was started by amazing scientists and policy wonks and campaigners, but we weren't started and we're not led by artists and storytellers. So I kind of have been trying to bridge those two things for a good part of my career. And these are just some of the different ways that climate can help us with climate: unlocking courage and creativity, breaking climate silence, and really helping to envision what a more positive future than just the apocalypse could look like, easing anxiety and isolation and grief, showing beauty and joy even in the midst of the climate crisis. Like, we know from the most recent IPCC report that in our lifetimes, I'm 37, an older millennial, it's going to get worse, right? From now until the day I die, climate change is going to get worse. And there's not anything we can do about that. That's just what's locked in. Where we do still have a lot of power and agency is making sure that we keep it to 1.5 degrees Celsius and kind of avoid the hellscape scenario for our children, for the next generation. And then also we have a lot of agency around the societies and the structures that we build to help care for people and build societies that are healthy and compassionate and aren't, as climate does get worse, that aren't just, leaving a lot of people out kind of high and dry. And so, but regardless, we know that climate will get worse, and we know that we still need to find beauty and joy in the midst of that environment, because that is our life. And I love when TV and film does this. Station 11 was one of my favorite, most recent stories, and it was about that. It wasn't climate, it was actually a pandemic worse than the one that we had, but it was very much about the power of art and beauty and joy in the midst of really hard kind of societal moments. And then it also, of course, inspires collective power, and it inspires, it shows really the interconnection between climate change and justice, because we know that, a core component of climate is around racial justice, because the people who are impacted first and worst by climate change are vulnerable people, and they're more likely to be BIPOC communities. So it's very interconnected. There's also economic justice and gender justice. There's so many different connections to other really important social issues that many of us care about. Okay, that's the power of story. Arguably the most powerful form of storytelling in our culture is Hollywood. The other big one is religion, which I know a little bit about, but just some of the things that Hollywood has helped to shift in our society. Seatbelts were largely popularized by Hollywood, and that was intentional. The designated driver campaign, really making drunk driving into a huge cultural taboo, was a big Hollywood campaign. Cigarettes, decreasing the prevalence of cigarettes and kind of the sexiness of cigarettes, was an intentional Hollywood campaign. And then, of course, more recently, we've seen Hollywood really significantly impact public imagination and public will around LGBTQ rights and racial justice. So it has a profound impact on popular imagination, and that translates into political will and the society that we live in. However, it's largely lacking. Climate is largely lacking in TV and film. This was something I definitely noticed, but we now have the research that shows that this is true. We worked with USC's Media Impact Project. This research is not public yet, but it's roughly 2.8% of scripts from 2016 to 2020 mention climate change or anything related to climate change. We tested 36 related keywords like renewable energy and sea level rise. So that is a very, very small percentage. So we have a lot of opportunity for growth. And it's creating this like weird dynamic where the world that we live in, which, you know, the Washington Post did research that came out a couple months ago, that 40% of Americans experienced a climate disaster last year. So it's becoming a more and more prevalent part of our lives. We're directly experiencing it. We're seeing it more on the news. So it's creating this strange dynamic where the world that we live in isn't the world of the films and the shows that we watch and love. And that's not only bad for climate in the world, it's also bad for the industry, because you want to create, you know, you want to create connection and you know, with your audience. And so one of our big arguments is that you shouldn't incorporate climate just because it's the right thing to do, but also because it makes stories more relevant and authentic to today's audiences and their experience. And we were created to change this, basically. This was a quote that we interviewed over 100 TV and film writers last summer and fall to inform this playbook that we're working on. And I thought this really captured the sentiment that we encountered, which was basically, you know, writers feel like they have three choices writing when it comes to climate: the apocalypse, being really preachy and didactic, or not writing about it at all. And what we have to do is to show them that it's possible to make great art and entertainment about, you know, the things we care about. So that's our big goal. And we did we found that a lot of writers were equating climate stories with apocalypse stories, which is when it does show up on screen, it's almost always one of two tropes, the apocalypse, or it's kind of somebody shaming someone else about their plastic straws or their SUV, or, you know, it's the annoying neighbor bitching about you about the recycling. You know, it's kind of using this shame trope. And both shame and the apocalypse are two tropes that are not very helpful when it comes to climate change. To actually motivating people to care and want to do something. Our goal is to see that 50% of climate is included and acknowledged in 50% of scripts by 2025. That is really ambitious. I don't think we can measure that. So our goal is by 2030, we could measure the shows that are on air, and we would see that 50%, it has risen from that 2.8% to 50%. And I think that's very doable. I feel, and that's in, obviously it's not historical dramas or sci-fi that's set in a different universe, but that's scripts that are set in this universe right now or in the next 100 years. And we also don't mean stories where it's like this huge, you know, necessarily this huge part of this story. We're just talking about acknowledging that it exists in the story world in any way. But just acknowledging that it's a part of our lives. Our approach, our strategies are the climate storytelling playbook, which is what I'll talk about in a second. It comes out April 19th. We're really excited about it. We've been working on it about a year now. We do offer, story consulting, so direct support to writers and films and shows who wants, more in-depth consulting. And that's everything from connecting people to experts or people on the ground with lived experience. One benefit of being in the climate movement so long as I have a lot of networks amongst like grassroots communities and different climate organizations. So we're trying to create that bridge so that when a writer wants to talk to a farmer in Nebraska who's been impacted by drought, we know exactly who to go to find that character and connect them to the writer working on a story. Also, a lot of research support is a big part of what we do, and script reviews. Our goal is to make it as easy as possible for writers to write about this, to really give it to them on a silver platter. And that is basically one of the other big insights that we found during our research, was that a lot of writers were just going to Google and getting really overwhelmed because there's 500 different organizations working on this. It's really unclear who's trustworthy and who isn't. And even when you do end up on, say, NASA's website, someone that know is trustworthy, honest, oftentimes a lot of the language is still very technical and scientific and wonky and hard to decipher. Like, I went onto NASA's website thinking through some, putting myself in the headspace of someone who hasn't been working on this a long time. And even a lot of the language on NASA's website would be very hard for me to understand had I not had a lot of background in it. So our goal and our job is to take those things and just translate it and make it as easy as possible for writers to incorporate it into their stories. And I want to do a lot more around the Research Hub as a follow-up project, but the Research Hub and the Storytelling Pipeline, which is essentially accelerating new projects where climate is a bigger part of it. Those two are kind of future programs that we are working towards launching. But yeah, the playbook is basically our main goal for the playbook was to, and also Lydia and Zena have given us great feedback on the playbook and been advisors. So we're very grateful. We've had an incredible network of advisors and partners working with us on this. But it basically, the main goal was just to broaden the scope of possibilities, the menu of possibilities beyond just the apocalypse and this shame trope that we encounter a lot, and really just show a larger menu of all the different captivating ways that you could write about climate, everything from something more subtle to something more in depth that aren't just those two tropes. So we do a lot of character profiles, both of fictional characters, but also of real people. And we did the fictional ones because, one component of a great character is showing their flaws. And we didn't want to ask, climate leaders to tell us their dark secrets, although the ones that we did interview were quite vulnerable with us. But just showing that there's so many different kinds of fascinating people that you could have be a part of your story. We do a really fun, one of my favorite sections is we take a bunch of TV shows that are off air and we write climate log lines into them. So that's, we did one for the Golden Girls and we chose a bunch of different ones to really show a huge variety of genre, everything from funny to more poignant, but just to show that it can be done across a lot of different genres. Yeah, and we actually got to write with some of the writers work with some of the writers who were on some of those shows, which was really fun. We talked about this. TV writers associate climate stories with lectures and apocalypse. Other parts of the playbook it was really critical to us to show the intersectionality and the justice piece of climate. So that's how we start. We have a whole section dedicated to it, and it's woven throughout the entire playbook. We also do address psychology and mental health a lot, both how psychology impacts characters, but also we include mental health tips for writers, kind of honoring the fact that writing about this can be very emotionally challenging. And so we provide some tips for how to navigate your own mental health. We do include a section on fossil fuel industry narrative strategies, which, just kind of goes into all of the stories that the fossil fuel industry has spent billions of dollars trying to get us to believe. And then we also have a library of experts. So trying to solve that problem where people aren't quite sure who to trust to go to for expertise or knowledge, by just giving them a menu of really great experts that we know are very trustworthy and very knowledgeable. And then, it's called a playbook. It's actually not going to be a physical book. It is a digital resource. It will look a little bit like this, or this is how how the article pages will show up. It'll be available to the public, so I'll make sure that you guys have access to it. It's just Good Energy Stories is the website. We have a splash page up now, but the playbook will be up shortly. And then the consulting practice, I'm gonna go, this is one of the case studies. This was actually the first show that I worked on. And I worked on it because the writer wanted to write a story about a young evangelical woman who challenged her powerful evangelical father. I'm not an evangelical anymore, but I know what it's like to be one. So anyways, he was doing research on it, and he actually came across one of my old interns, and he was like, that's like a real person. And so Alex Maggio, the writer, reached out to me, and we worked together to craft this story that was loosely inspired by my real life. And I got to feedback on the script and do a bunch of consulting and brainstorming, and also provided some other experts in research. And it just kind of, through that experience, I was like, can you just introduce me to all of your writer friends so I can figure out why more of these stories aren't on screen? And basically, that's what I just kind of on my own did, a big listening session, and just tried to get as many writers on the phone as I could. And then the Sierra Club, who is one of my close partners, came on board, and then Bloomberg Philanthropies, who's one of our main funders, and it really evolved into what is now Good Energy. So we did commission the USC research. I want to do a bunch more of it. I really want to start doing some impact research as, knock on wood, more climate stories come out, really studying how they're impacting audiences. Both their perception and their likelihood of taking action, and how different kinds of stories impact audiences in different ways. And this is the kind of the beginnings of an idea and plan that we've started putting together around, really, in addition to supporting projects that have already been greenlit, trying to accelerate new projects and get new projects into the pipeline that have climate and different climate narratives that we know are important as central components. That's us. These are our funders, and these are some of our partners. And that's Good Energy.
Wonderful, Anna Jane. Thank you so much for sharing that. One of the things that I would just invite our students and our audience to do first is, if there's any questions or observations, let's please use the chat function. I always have some questions, but I'd like to invite them to go first. So let me just take a moment to invite any questions the students might have. I wonder if I could start with a question, and just to ask, you focus a lot on climate, and sometimes we look at sustainability from the perspective of social responsibility as well as environmental responsibility. You certainly spoke about topics of gender, environmental justice, involvement in cultural centers, and concern and engagement with the BIPOC community. But could you speak about that emphasis on climate and kind of your thinking about that, and kind of, is it fair to understand kind of a central focus on that in the Good Energy Project, or would I be misunderstanding?
No, we're exclusively focused on storytelling around the climate crisis, or incorporating the climate crisis into all kinds of stories. And yes, that was very intentional. I think that climate change often gets conflated as an environmental issue, and that is, it's easier to kind of compartmentalize and say, this is, the environment's over here, racial justice is over here, gender justice is over here, economic over here. And climate really connects to and underpins, all, it exacerbates all different kinds of inequalities, and connects, across all of those. So it was really important to me to center climate change, because it's not just an environmental issue, it's a human rights issue, it's a racial justice issue. And it was important. And also it's also because climate isn't being talked about enough. Like, that's one of the major goals of this whole project, is just to get more characters talking about it so that more humans talk about it.
So a question was just posed, how did you begin this project process? What was it like first starting out to create this?
Yeah, so it did start with this kind of listening session where I did just get on the phone. Alex Maggio, who's become a good friend and is one of our closest advisors, he did introduce me to a ton of his writer friends, and I called them up and I basically just asked the question, like, why isn't this showing up in your opinion, and what are the hurdles, and maybe what could the climate movement, how could we change this? How could we better support writers? And that, led to conversations. The Sierra Club is the sponsor of my podcast. In a lot of ways, they've been my organizational home. I've worked for them. I've consulted with them. And so they came on board as a partner. They were actually our first funder and our first kind of our main partner. And so that evolved into this project where it started with listening, with just talking to as many people as possible and identifying what the hurdles are, and kind of crafting a strategy that could help to meet and support writers. I'd say it started with listening.
Thank you. Another question, do you find there are certain genres of movies in which writers have an easier or harder time incorporating the mission of the Good Energy Project?
Yeah, hold on. I'm just going to grab my computer cord because my computer is going to die, but I'll be right back.
Okay, no worries. This is something we're all familiar with.
Yeah, I thought it would last, but no. I would say, obviously political dramas like Madam Secretary, there is a natural, it comes up a lot in politics. Ironically, or my understanding, I haven't actually verified this independently, but was during the Trump years, a lot of political dramas went offline because we were all inundated with politics and we didn't want to watch them for entertainment. But yes, political dramas are an easy one. My favorite genre to see, it's my favorite genre period, but I also love it for climate is dramedy, because I think it is, obviously there's a lot of drama and hard stuff when it comes to climate, but it's also, there's an absurdity to it that I think we, underestimate the comedic possibilities, and certainly Don't Look Up showed us that. You could take a really comedic approach to climate, and brilliant writing. And then also, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia did an episode on climate, which was also hilarious. Got like really philosophical in places, which was super interesting. One of my favorite climate stories that's come out so far, one is Beast of the Southern Wild, because I'm from the Gulf Coast, and it's just a gorgeous movie. And one of the first climate stories, it came out in 2012. The other is First Reformed, which was a pretty dark climate story. It was very much kind of interwove faith in climate change, which I personally find fascinating for obvious reasons. But it had this kind of very, I won't say hopeful, but sort of expansive ending, which I found, it left you in a place of possibility, which is probably the emotion that I'm most interested in evoking when it comes to climate stories, is leaving, because one thing I think is really important is having stories that make us more comfortable with uncertainty. One of our advisors is a story scientist, and he studies how different stories create different cognitive effects. And humans evolved to hate uncertainty, because if we didn't know if there was a tiger behind the bush, that could be a very dangerous situation. So it's actually one of the psychological hypotheses for when people wake up to the severity of climate. We see a lot of them swing straight to the "we're doomed" side of it. And it's because in some ways it's more psychologically comfortable to go straight to "we're doomed" than it is to live in this weird in-between space. So I really love stories that allow the audience to kind of be more comfortable with uncertainty and leave you in a place of possibility, but don't answer all the questions for you, because I think that's reflective of where we are in real life. We get to create the future.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I was thinking kind of about the mental models, and you spoke about the tropes of either apocalypse, or what was the other trope that you mentioned?
The shame
the
trope.
shame trope, right? Exactly. And I know it was interesting. We had a presentation earlier in the week from the CEO of Grove Collaborative, and one of the things that he shared was that more people believe plastics is a problem than believe in climate change. And they also think that when people think related to consumer products, sustainability, the minute you introduce the word sustainability, then the mental model is, oh, that's an inferior product, because you have to give up quality for sustainable responsibility. And that's a mental model that people kind of get trapped in, and that becomes a problem in their marketing and consumer messaging, because they actually would propose they have an excellent product that is environmentally responsible. So they're working in their own way to kind of break down some of those tropes. And you just spoke about one. Are there other kind of tropes and kind of mental frameworks that storytelling, from your perspective, you could identify, or that are kind of targets of that storytelling influence?
Yeah, I would say, certainly the apocalypse is the other really common one. My theory about this is that has to do with the fact that the apocalypse is such an ancient story, and that's in almost every mythology or religion. There's some apocalyptic part of it. And so I think in storytellers' minds, and in all of our minds where we're envisioning the future, if there is fear around it, it's easier to go straight to the apocalypse than it is to imagine what the alternative to that is, because we have so many examples of that. We've all seen those stories, and so it's easier to envision that than it is something different. So that is a big one. The shame one is a big one. We see a lot of eco-terrorists, which I used to say, like, we've seen enough eco-terrorists, like, let's move on to other kinds of characters and stories. But then this movie called Woman at War came out. That's an Icelandic film. It's another one of my favorite climate stories, and it's about an eco-terrorist, but it is this character that is just so captivating. She's a middle-aged woman who's like just a crazy, like, badass. And she also, she's adopting a child, and she's a choir teacher, and she has all of these different complexities that make her a really rich character. And she's also not hurting people. She's taking out fossil fuel infrastructure. So you end up really identifying with her and her cause. And so it just totally took down my argument that we'd seen enough eco-terrorists, because clearly if you're an amazing writer, you can write a character where you still come away with it certainly feeling very moved on climate change. So I wouldn't say you can't. There's very few tropes where I think you can just unilaterally say they're unhelpful. The one exception I would say that I am really firm on, any of the fossil fuel narrative strategies, obviously we hope that writers will stay away from. But within that, I think that there's a lot of danger around, and this is actually one of the climate narratives that has been studied, and there's a whole huge other strategy and need to put more money into studying climate narratives at an academic level, because we just haven't done enough of that to see how these different kinds of narratives impact audiences. But you can get into a lot of danger when you're depicting climate migrants, as because obviously that is a component of climate change, as countries. I mean, we're already seeing it across the world, populations that have had to relocate because they're experiencing really detrimental climate impacts, and that intersects with things like war and, all of it. Climate is never just totally divorced from other parts of a society or a life. But yeah, you just have to be really, really careful about how you depict climate migrants, because that can, obviously we don't want any kind of story that's going to lend to more xenophobia or fear around the people who are being forced to relocate.
Okay. One person asked, have you come across any leaders in the film industry already making a movement to address climate change instead of using negative references or tropes?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Lydia is certainly one of them. But yeah, Adam McKay, just, don't look up. I think that a big fear in the industry, especially on the executive side, is, one of the kind of stories that I think a lot of people in the industry were telling is people don't want to hear about climate change. It's too dark, it's too scary. But then there's a lot of stories that kind of debunk that. Handmaid's Tale, very dark, very popular. I'm blanking on the name, but a recent Netflix one that was very dark and very popular. There's lots of examples of shows that have darker, harder materials. But another one was, basically that you couldn't tell it in a way that would be entertaining. It would be too preachy. It'd be, audiences can tell when you're trying to hide broccoli and chocolate, that kind of argument. But I think Adam McKay's film just definitively shot that down, that you can make a really highly entertaining story inspired by climate change that also not only is hilarious and reaches many, many millions of people, but it also has made a lot of money. These are very marketable stories. And so that has opened up, I think, all kinds of new doors within the industry to these sorts of stories. But there's quite a few others who are kind of on the vanguard of wanting. Scott Z. Burns, who just did a story, Apple Plus or Apple TV story called Extrapolations. That's an anthology series that will come out in 2023, and it's all about climate change, and it has like every A-lister you can imagine in it. So we're definitely seeing movement. We're headed in the right direction. Our goal is just to accelerate it.
Accelerate that. Thinking that maybe related to the previous question of genres, but there's plenty of documentaries related to this, I'm assuming. So does that fall out of the storytelling and kind of persuasive? I'm just wondering kind of how you see that.
Yeah, no, certainly that's a form of storytelling, and it's a beautiful art form. I think the reason that we are focusing on scripted entertainment is it was the biggest gap, and also documentaries. We have a lot of climate documentaries, and we have some really, really great ones. But they tend to, I think, reach more of the choir. Like if you're watching a documentary, it is most often because you are interested in the subject matter. Whereas scripted entertainment, like not everyone who watched Don't Look Up or even First Reformed or Beast of a Southern Wild were coming at it because it was a climate story, right? They just wanted to see it because they loved Ethan Hawke or Leonardo DiCaprio or any number of other reasons. They thought it might be a good use of 2 hours of their time, and hopefully walked away with a deeper emotional experience when it comes to climate change.
Thank you. Is there the category of storytelling to children and climate? Kind of what's happening in the industry related to that? Are there special regulations, concerns, sensitivities? Just that subset of storytelling in children.
Yeah, so it's a really great question, and there's beginning to be more research around early childhood development and climate change, and like how do you talk about this in a way that isn't terrifying to children, but also is honest, and real about where we are. So there's some good research coming out, and there has been, this is an area we would love to do more support in, specifically for writers of children's content. But there's some conversations that have started about how to translate that research into what that would look like for scripted content. My experience or knowledge is that there's still pretty initial conversations, but they're definitely happening, and I imagine that will grow for sure over the next year or two.
Thank you. And again, I could ask questions all night long. Let me invite the students who are online one more time for any questions that you would want us, to make sure that we can ask Anna Jane. I will have one more myself. Okay. Well, one question I would ask is, and it's a little bit like I had asked Lydia and Zena, advice for our students. They run graduate students, executive education, so professionals. We have a number of undergraduates also who are listening tonight, and we're all storytellers. And so I wonder what advice you might give to us, both related to how we understand story and ourselves as storytellers. And then secondly, how you would encourage us to look at the industry and the storytelling industry and the question of climate story.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, as far as like personally what we can do in our own lives as humans and storytellers and professionals, I think I remember my brother's actually a filmmaker, and he worked with me on a documentary we did around the Paris COP. And when we were there, it's funny, him and the producer and the director at different points of our trip cornered me and were like, I don't feel like I'm doing enough, like, do I need to like switch my career and go into climate activism? And I was like, no, like what you're doing is critically important. Like you have a skill set and that the climate movement desperately needs, and stay in your field, become the best storyteller that you can be. And then when it makes sense for your stories, make sure that you're bringing that into it. So I would say that's true for whatever our profession is, whether or not you're going into business or religion or filmmaking. We all have really important skill sets, and we don't need to just go and become a climate activist or an environmental lawyer, kind of the typical careers that you would think of. That you can have great impact in all different sectors of society, and in some ways you have even more impact when you are in different kinds of professions. But I would also say, like, going back to that thing around that Dr. Catherine Hayhoe says around it, the most important thing you could do is talk about it. I think that is true for our own stories. I think obviously this isn't always true, but oftentimes the most beautiful stories are rooted in the writer's experience, right? They're inspired by something they're wrestling with or an experience they went through, and writing the story is a way for them to explore that. And then it becomes this beautiful piece of art or entertainment that engages people far beyond them. And I think that that's true in our personal lives too. Like whatever moves you when it comes to climate, whatever emotionally impacts you, or wherever your curiosity lies, I would just encourage you to lean into that and explore that, because it's probably there for I'm sure it's there for a reason. And don't be afraid to talk about it, and don't feel like you have to be an expert to talk about it. That's something else that we run into a lot with writers, is the sense that, like, I don't know enough to write about this. And it's like, nobody knows enough. None of us, like, there's a few climate scientists, but even climate scientists, like, they're not experts on all climate science. They're experts on clouds or ice cores. So you don't have to be an expert on all these different facets of it. You just have to be passionate about it, and you have to want to do something about it, because it's the biggest story in our lives, and will be for forever.
And what strikes me as you share that is it circles back to some of the work that you have as really part of the charter of the Good Energy Project, specifically around research, access to experts, the ability to consult, so that when one is forming a story, that there's the right kind of content and research that's informing that. And it goes back to the way in which you're designing the project of your initiative. And so want to reinforce that as well. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of great people out there who are doing all different kinds of parts of it. So we're excited to help writers, but there's definitely the climate movement is vast. There's people in Los Angeles. There's some amazing groups in Los Angeles. So if you care, I just encourage you to look around and see what's happening locally. There's some great different pieces.
Well, would it be okay to ask you to name a few? Is that putting you on the spot just for our LA audience when you say there's a lot of great what? We know that, but just what comes to your mind?
The two that come to mind, I'm a Sierra Clubber for life, but the Sierra Club has a really great team in Los Angeles. They do some really important work around the urban oil fields there, in addition to all sorts of other climate related issues and environmental issues. I also love Hip Hop Caucus. They're one of our partners. Reverend Yearwood, who is the leader, he has taken a very similar strategy, but focused on the hip hop entertainment community, but also works a lot on storytelling. So we work on those pieces, and of course, music is just another form of storytelling. But they have a lot. They have quite a few staff in Los Angeles and have a lot of stuff in Los Angeles, and they focus on climate justice and voting rights. And of course, there's so many intersections between climate justice and voting rights. So
yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for letting me put you on the spot there a little bit. That was just wonderful. Anna Jane, thank you so much. Let me just double check that we don't have any other questions. No, I think we're good. Deeply appreciate your sharing this evening, and I think you're on East Coast time. Do I understand that right?
Central.
So you're, what's that?
Central time.
Central time. Okay, so it's not as bad, but it is getting a little later in the evening. So I want to thank you so profoundly for this. The inspiration of storytelling and really the collaboration that you spoke to, and your work with Zena and Lydia and this larger community of those who are advancing this work. I want to thank you and them for this incredibly compelling and informative afternoon on entertainment and the environment and sustainability. Just a quick thing to say that this has been part of a course that we're offering for as part of a collaboration with the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative. And so there are participants from 7 organizations globally who are participating in this, as well as those from Loyola Marymount University. And so being able to bring this together as a benefit for our various audiences is so really important. We will be continuing this with one more session tomorrow, California time, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And that is we have a representative from Albert of the British Academy of Film and Television talking about their work as well. And a lot of that will crosswalk some of what we have heard this afternoon. And I would just like to finish by saying that Anna Jane, you started your presentation by affirming the profoundly human dimension of this. We've looked at business opportunity within entertainment. We've looked at the tactics and practical implementation around environmental responsibility and production sets, et cetera. We've talked about the way in which we as human beings are inspired by story and the way in which story can catalyze both sensitivity and action. But what each of these presentations do is profoundly resonate with our humanity, hopes and dreams and aspirations and fears. And as you had mentioned, this ability to live in not the either or space, but really in this space of resilience and adaptation. And so I'd like to really thank each of you as presenters for sharing this information and really enabling us to come to this with our professional understanding and our academic and intellectual skills, but also really profoundly with the human heart. And so thank you so very much.